well, first of all, for having me here today. I'm very, very happy that we managed to make this happen. And also thank you very much to everyone who took time to come and listen to this talk today. So I am going to share my screen now, although I think I should be made co-host to do that. So yes, thanks. Should be able to do it. There you go. Can you see it properly? Yeah, great. Okay. So as Stephen was saying, I'm an archaeologist. My background is in archaeology and archaeological science. But since the beginning of my PhD, I've actually realized that there were several things I could do that would also get me a little bit into the history of science. In this case, working with early modern materials that were coming from contexts such as artisanal contexts and more like context of chemical laboratories. I really, really wanted to see how archaeology and archaeological science can contribute to some of the narratives that run right now at the forefront of the history of science. And one of the things that historians of science are really increasingly looking at, as you will also know very well, is the whole idea of materials and chemical practice, aspects of practice, and an attention to materials. And I think that there's quite a lot of scope for interdisciplinary dialogue here with material culture, specialisms and disciplines. And this is a little bit what I've tried to do during my PhD research. So, and this is, yeah, my approach to my research as well. And I think we are quite lucky, especially for the early modern period, because we've got a lot of extant materials from laboratories and from chemical contexts of sorts. I'm pulling up some examples here. So these are on the left-hand side. You can see the experimental glass made by Michael Faraday, and this is now at the Royal Institution in London, where he made the glass. And he also kept notebooks. So again, there's this interesting connection between the textual sources and the materials, and which is really fascinating to me. And on the right-hand side, you can see the glassware from this impressive assemblage of glassware from a laboratory in Wittenberg in Germany, which is believed to be the laboratory of Daniel Sennert, the famous physician. Then there are materials that are more closely comparable to what we're going to discuss today, and so ceramic tools and ceramic materials from laboratories. These all come from a laboratory in an alchemical laboratory in Austria, and you can see crucibles. You can see other tools and vessels that are mirrored in Agricola's woodcuts. So we've got quite a lot to work on, I think, and these materials can tell us, and the scientific analysis of these materials and the traces that are still within them, they can tell us quite a lot about what was going on and about issues of chemical practice. So let's go into the Ashmolean case study. This is one of my two case studies for the PhD. And probably the most interesting one, or the most, I think the most exciting one. The Ashmolean laboratory was founded in 1683. And it was founded on this whole sort of idea following a bit, well, very much following on the utopian ideas of Francis Bacon's of Solomon's house, or somewhere, some place where the whole of human race could advance through the advancement of knowledge on natural materials, based on practice, based on study. And it was founded at the end of the 17th century, and the very first director of experiments there. So the Ashmolean Museum was, I think, an extremely interesting context because it's got in itself a lot of different layers. So it was, as we said, an important place of natural philosophy, but it was also where chemistry was first taught at an English university, at least officially. So it was also part of the university. And it was also a place where things were made for the market in a way. So anything that could be made in the laboratory, that was made in the laboratory, could be sold for money. So there's all sorts of different layers happening at the same time. And the person where all of these layers kind of converge is Robert Plot, the first director of experiments, the first professor of chemistry at the laboratory. And the laboratory itself and the museum itself had three limbs, in a way, three parts. One was the collection of curiosities on the top floor. One was the lecture theater on the ground floor. And finally, there was the laboratory down in the basement. And this image there that you can see is it's showing, of course, the building of the laboratory, of the museum, actually, sorry, which today quite fittingly houses the Museum of the History of Science in Oxford on Broad Street, while the Ashmolean, of course, has moved to its new location. So Robert Plot was a very important natural philosopher of the time, and especially in Oxford. He had written and published the Natural History of Oxfordshire only a few years before the opening of the museum, and that is what eventually landed him the job. Because he gave him a lot of prestige. In a way, he became quite an important and well-known natural philosopher. So he will go on to write the natural history of Staffordshire later on when he will quit the job at the museum. We don't know very much about what Plot was doing in the laboratory. We don't know very much at all about what was going on in the laboratory, what sort of operations these people were interested in. And this is where materials can come to help us. So this is a picture of the museum today. So the Museum of the History of Science with the old entrance on the side. And that on the left-hand side is the Sheldonian Theatre, for those of you who know Oxford. So as many archaeological stories begin, this story also begin with random excavations for extension works done at the end of the 90s at the rear of the building of the museum, History of Science Museum. And upon removing some stone slabs on the floor, excavators found lots and lots of materials. Thousands of bones, both animal and human bones, probably related to the teaching of anatomy that went on in the 18th century, but also a lot of ceramic materials, which have to be related to the laboratory itself, to the laboratory operations. And these are mostly crucibles of different kinds, as you can see from these drawings. There's also distillation equipment, so retards that you can see here, the bottom of a cucurbit. I hope you can see my cursor as well down here. And generally, these are the materials as they appear today, and they are kept at the Ashmolean. So lots of materials that came from the laboratory. We don't know exactly about the date. It's very hard to set a specific chronology for these materials based on the style of the objects. This kind of really did not change for centuries. But the analysis of the inside of the crucibles, whatever was left inside, the residues, and the reconstruction of the operations is actually helping because we could establish that the sort of operation, the sort of chemical activities going on were very much in line with end of the 17th century and first half of the 18th century, so quite early days of the lab. And many of these materials display heavy signs of use. In this case, you can see discoloration of the surface, you can see deposits on the surface, you can see layers, glassy layers, like in this case here, stuck to the inside of the vessels, spots of whatever, different colored spots on them. So this is the kind of things that I looked at, a bit like waste and residues. And so what does these residues tell us about the laboratory and the experimental work at the laboratory? So first of all, an interesting set of information can come from the tools themselves. The analysis of the crucibles tell us that these materials were extremely high quality, really the best that you could find in the market at the time. The triangular crucibles that you can see here are very famous in this period. They come from Germany. They were mainly made in Germany, in a few places in Germany. And you can see these kinds of crucibles everywhere in paintings, woodcuts, and all sorts of documents. You can see one here, for example, in this woodcut. There's always these triangular crucibles. Even the most absurd and weird-looking alchemical images often will display these very crucibles here. They're very famous triangular ones. But these are not the only crucibles that were found at the laboratory. There's many more which are not of German origin, and they are probably made in England, but were equally outstanding in their technical quality. And this is interesting because it's clearly like an attempt at reproducing the best crucibles from Germany, only with local raw materials. And it's hard to tell. So these are all examples of these other crucibles, and you can see some of them are small, some of them are larger, like this one here this tall crucible here that has a closed profile. We will encounter it later, and the retort as well, we will encounter later. And I was trying to think where this could be made or could be coming from. It was quite hard. An interesting piece of information that I really need to get to looking more is the experimental potter John Dwight of Fulham. He was very well known at the time. He was from Oxford, but he worked in near London in Fulham, and he was famous for replicating lots of technical sort of new types of ceramics. He managed to replicate porcelain. He was one of the first who managed to replicate Chinese porcelain, or anyway, imitate it with a different technology than the Chinese one, but he was famous for this. And Robert Plot himself visited his factory and tell us that he managed to reproduce and replicate the triangular crucibles. You can see them here. So all of these crucibles come from an excavation done at the site of John Dwight's pottery in Fulham. And you can see there are triangular crucibles, just like the German ones, but these are locally made by him. And also other crucibles of different forms, of different shapes, which remind very much of the Ashmolean crucibles. And I should really look into this a bit more, because it's very hard to access these materials, unfortunately. So an interesting hypothesis is that John Dwight was actually the one who provided some part at least of the laboratory tools to the Ashmolean. So high quality tools, extremely important for withstanding very high temperatures and very reactive chemicals going on in the crucibles. And this is a very important theme at the Ashmolean laboratory. But what's important is also what was inside of the crucibles, and what we could find is two main areas of activity. One is glass, so experiments with glass, different recipes to make different types of glass. So if you haven't been to the Ashmolean for a bit, I put here an image where some of these crucibles are actually on display now in one newly opened room of the Ashmolean, where they are trying to display the early days of the lab. So I strongly suggest to go and see it. It's quite interesting. And among these pieces, there's also this big crucible down here with a blue glass stuck to it. And I've analyzed it. It's here on the right-hand corner, bottom. And this is actually lead crystal. And I found at least two different types of lead crystal at the Ashmolean. One is blue, one is not, one is colorless. And lead crystal is interesting, again, because it's a recent, new type of glass that had been patented only a few years before the opening of the museum by an English entrepreneur called George Ravenscroft, who became quite famous. And the recipe, the ultimate recipe, did not really, I mean, it wasn't established for quite some time. We can see the recipe changing through time, those who have analyzed lead crystal. And so it's quite interesting to see it here, because again, it's quite an experimental new type of glass. The other type of glass we found, you can see it on the left-hand side of this image, is white, opaque white glass. And I could find two different recipes for it, using different ingredients, different reagents to make it white. All of this can be found in recipe books of the time or in treatises on glassmaking of the time. And it's interesting to see such variation in only a few fragments analyzed. So again, a lot of experimentation going on with new technologies. The second area of technological work at the Ashmolean Museum, at the Ashmolean Laboratory, is the metallurgy of zinc. And this was quite exciting to discover. So a lot of pieces show these white deposits and white residues on them. One of them I could cut through. This is a fragment of one of those tall closed profile crucibles that I showed you before. I could cut through it and there's still some zinc, fresh metal, in place. And that was quite exciting because zinc is a very puzzling and very interesting substance at this time. The knowledge around zinc was shifting, had been shifting for a while, but will be shifting a lot here at this time, 17th, 18th century. And this is because zinc was not one of the known metals of antiquity. Even though they knew how to make brass, for example, they had known this since antiquity, since Greek, Roman period, but they did not know that what was responsible for brass was actually another metal. They thought that just by adding this stone to copper, you end up with brass. And so they did not realize that zinc was a metal for a long, long time. And knowledge around zinc and this substance puzzled both metallurgists and natural philosophers as well a lot. They were trying to understand what zinc was, and there's quite a lot of experimentation around zinc. We can see this in for instance, experiments done by people at the Royal Society or the Oxford Philosophical Society as well. And so it's quite significant to find evidence of zinc working here. The reason why zinc was not really understood as a metal is because of its weird behavior as compared to other metals. If you try to smelt zinc to extract it from its ore in the same way you would do with copper, zinc evaporates. Zinc is extremely volatile. It evaporates, you lose it, and you don't get any zinc at the end of the process. So they did not really know how to get it. And because they never really saw it in metallic form, they did not realize it was a metal in its own right. And there's a lot of different names given to zinc, mirroring the confusion around this. But what people knew from antiquity is that something was going on there. Something was not completely clear there. And what you can see in this woodcut, I think, again, from Agricola, is this guy on top of the furnace kind of scraping zinc deposits off the walls, and these were then retrieved later on and used to make brass. So they knew that something was going on. They knew that there was this kind of mineral / maybe metal, but there was a lot of resistance against understanding zinc as a metal, because, you know, metals were supposed to be 7, like the planets. So an 8th metal would have upset a whole set of beliefs, you know. So knowledge is shifting a lot in the 17th century around zinc, and one of the decisive things that shifted knowledge around zinc is the arrival of zinc ingots from the east, from China, India, where zinc was known, very well known, as a metal, and had been known for a few centuries already. In China and in India, they knew how to retrieve zinc, how to get zinc, and they did so with a process of distillation. So because zinc is extremely volatile, they let zinc vapor rise to a cooler area of the furnace or of the retort of the vessel, and they would just channel the vapor until it condensed in zinc metal. They were using slightly different technology. In China, they were collecting it on top of the vessel, as you can see in the image. In India, they would channel it down to another vessel, which was underneath the main retort. But the idea is the same: a distillation technology. So this is what I think we can see at the Ashmolean laboratory. So this distillation apparatus that we can find there was probably used for making, for experimenting with zinc and with zinc distillation. The crucible with that kind of zinc deposit stuck to it with some metal in it, maybe that was also what they were trying to do. They were trying to retrieve zinc like people did with furnaces, you know. Scraping off the walls of the vessel. So I believe that what we are seeing at the Ashmolean Museum and in the Ashmolean laboratory is very much about, they were working with new technologies, with technological innovation of the time. So materials give us a glimpse of the research agenda of the laboratory, which is interesting because we don't really know so much about it, partly because of secrecy reasons as well. As I said before, Robert Plot was selling some of these processes and some of these substances. It's important to know that Plot did not get a formal salary from the university for teaching. He relied on student fees and on anything that he could sell. So all of these new technologies were very, very valuable as trade secrets as well. But at the same time, these were also valuable philosophical, items of philosophical interest that a lot of natural philosophers at this time talk about. Robert Boyle talks about zinc a lot and about colored glass a lot, for example, but many more do. And so just as we see a lot of different layers concentrating in the Ashmolean Museum as an institution, we can see lots of different layers concentrating and coming together in its research agenda. So it was very much about explaining and understanding, but it was very much about making something valuable as well in terms of money. And this is why they were working with such important technological innovation of the time: lead crystal, zinc, all stuff that will then be very, very valuable later on. Zinc distillation will be patented only in 1738 by another entrepreneur called William Champion in Bristol, not very far from Oxford at all. And I also wanted to give you this brief quotations from Rudolf Glober, who was a very vocal advocate of zinc and retrieving zinc. He knew that something was going on. He knew that a lot of zinc was wasted because they let it escape. And so he called it the most excellent metal. And he was really like an advocate of working with it. So I think just to wrap this up, I would like to finish and then be open for discussion. I see what we see here through the material culture approach is maybe the most interesting thing that we see is this whole idea of the extremely permeable boundaries between craft and natural philosophy, something that historians are extremely interested now to explore, and they are and recent historiography is unraveling this more and more. And I think materials are extremely important tools to see this thing, to see this these overlapping interests and overlapping boundaries. So what materials also show us is a connecting thread through a lot of, through what I write in the what I wrote in the title, through a chemical community. They give us the sense of a larger picture of a chemical community in Oxford, where there were lots of different actors who may be working on different things and may have very different aims. John Dwight was very much interested in money, in his industry. Plot may be a bit more interested in if you want, in the philosophical value of the work, but as I said before, he was also very aware of the economic value of his work. But all of them, working with different things and different aims, they were very well aware of each other's work. And so, and this is what materials show us, I believe, this kind of interconnectedness between different actors in this community. And the Ashmolean, in this sense, looks like the very epicenter of this community, where all of these different layers come together. So I will finish it here. Yes, thank you very much. And very happy to answer any questions.